Sometimes the people closest to us hide the biggest truths, and when those truths come out, they can break a heart forever. It was a quiet Thursday evening. The sun had not fully set, and the city lights were just beginning to glow outside. The tall glass windows of Richard's office. He was supposed to stay late that night. A board meeting had been scheduled, and everyone expected him to return home after midnight. But as he looked at the empty chair across the table where his assistant usually sat, something inside told him to cancel the meeting and leave early. He packed his briefcase, loosened his tie, and whispered to himself, "Home. I need to be home." Richard's mansion stood on the edge of town, surrounded by tall trees that always seemed to guard it. As his car rolled into the driveway, he noticed something unusual. The front lights were off, but a faint glow came from the living room curtains. He frowned. Strange. Emily never keeps the house this dark when she's awake. Emily was his wife, and though their marriage looked perfect from the outside, Richard had felt a distance growing between them. He ignored it most days, convincing himself it was just the stress of work. He pushed the door open quietly, almost careful not to make a sound. The house smelled of fresh coffee, though Emily never drank coffee in the evenings. Richard paused, listening. He heard voices, soft, broken and filled with something he couldn't quite place. He stepped closer to the living room and froze at the doorway. Emily sat on the couch, her head lowered, holding something in her trembling hands. Across from her sat a young boy, no older than 12. His eyes were red, as though he had been crying for a long time. Richard's heart pounded in his chest. He whispered, almost afraid of his own words, Who is this boy?" Emily looked up suddenly, shock flooding her face. The boy wiped his tears quickly and turned his gaze away. Richard stepped inside slowly, confusion and fear fighting inside him. Emily stammered, "Richard, you weren't supposed to be home yet." His voice tightened. "I can see that. Now tell me, what's going on here, and why does this boy look at you like he knows you better than I do?" The room fell silent. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound. Richard felt as though the walls themselves were pressing in, demanding an answer. Emily's hands shook harder as she whispered, "There are things you don't know, things I should have told you long ago." Richard's chest tightened as he stared at the boy again. For some reason, the boy's eyes felt strangely familiar, almost like a reflection of someone Richard had once been. And at that moment, Richard realized his life was about to change forever. Richard stood frozen, his hand still gripping the side of the couch, his knuckles pale against the leather. The boy lowered his eyes to the floor, avoiding Richard's stare while Emily pressed her trembling fingers against her lips as though the words she wanted to say were too heavy to release. For a long moment, no one moved, the silence almost suffocating. The mansion, usually filled with the soft hum of music or the echo of staff moving through its halls, seemed suddenly foreign, too still, too loaded with something unspoken. Richard's voice finally cut through the air, quiet but sharp. "Emily, who is this boy?" Emily hesitated, her throat tight. Her eyes darted from Richard to the boy and back again. "Please, Richard, let's not do this right now. You came home early and—" Richard's tone hardened, though it carried more pain than anger. "Don't try to soften this," I asked. "You a question. Who is he?" The boy's small shoulders tensed. He looked up at Emily, his lips parted as though he wanted to speak but couldn't find the courage. Richard noticed the way his eyes glistened under the dim lamplight. Those eyes, wide, brown, but strangely carrying a shadow of something Richard recognized. He felt a chill run through him, and his chest tightened. Emily stood abruptly, nearly knocking the coffee cup from the table. She clutched her hands together. "Richard, listen to me. What you're thinking, it's not what it seems. Please, just hear me out." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then start explaining. Right now." The boy finally whispered, his voice shaking. "My name is Daniel." Richard turned his head sharply toward him. "Daniel," he repeated it, tasting the name like it carried some hidden history. "And why are you here, Daniel?" Daniel looked down again, fidgeting with the edge of his worn-out hoodie sleeve. Because I had nowhere else to go." His voice cracked with the weight of it. Richard's confusion deepened. He looked back at Emily. "Nowhere else to go? Why does this sound like he belongs here, Emily? Like you've been waiting for him?" Emily's lips trembled as tears gathered in her eyes. She sank back down to the couch, covering her face with both hands. "Richard, I should have told you years ago. I thought I could carry this secret forever, but I can't anymore. He's my son." The words seemed to shatter the air itself. Richard's heart slammed against his ribs, and for a second he couldn't breathe. His hands slipped from the couch as he staggered back, staring at her as though she had just turned into someone he no longer knew. "Your son." The words barely escaped his lips. Emily sobbed quietly. "It happened before you and I were married. I was young, scared and left alone. I had no choice but to let someone else raise him. I thought I could leave that part of my life behind, but..." She turned to look at Daniel, her face filled with both regret and tenderness. "But he found me, and I couldn't turn him away." Richard's body trembled with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. All these years. We've been married, and you never thought I deserved to know. You looked me in the eye every day, Emily, and you hid this from me." Emily's tears flowed freely now. "I was afraid of what you'd think of me, afraid you'd see me differently. I wanted to protect what we had." "Richard, you have to understand," Richard interrupted, his voice breaking. "Understand? Emily, I devoted my life to us, to you, and all this time, you carried a secret that changes everything." He looked at Daniel again, and his voice softened unintentionally. "And he's old enough to know the truth, old enough to carry scars that I don't even know exist." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his small hands clenched into fists. "I didn't mean to ruin anything," he whispered. "I just wanted to know my mom. That's all. I didn't even know who she was until last year. I didn't ask to be here. But I couldn't stay where I was anymore." Richard's heart twisted at the boy's words. The innocence in his voice cut deeper than Emily's confession. He realized this child wasn't the villain in the story. He was just a boy searching for something he had been denied his whole life. Still, the betrayal gnawed at him. He rubbed his temples, pacing the floor, his voice low. "Emily, how long has he been coming here?" Emily hesitated, her silence answering more than her words. Richard turned sharply toward her. "How long?" she whispered. "A few months." Richard let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Months. So every time I thought you were going out for groceries, or visiting your sister, or staying late at the art gallery, you were with him." Emily nodded weakly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought maybe I could find a way to bring it up slowly, but the longer I waited, the heavier it became." Richard leaned against the wall, staring at them, torn between rage and heartbreak. "And what about me? Did you ever once think about what this would do to me? That maybe the truth would break the trust I've given you?" Emily stood, moving closer. "Richard, please. This doesn't erase us. Everything we've built is real. I love you." He stepped back, his eyes burning. "Love? Emily, love doesn't hide children in shadows. Love doesn't wait for accidents to reveal secrets. You made me a stranger in my own home." The words hung heavy in the air. Daniel looked between them, his own eyes filling with tears. He tried to hold back. "Stop fighting," he pleaded softly. "Please, I didn't come here to make you fight. I just wanted to see her, to know her. If me being here makes everything worse, then I'll leave." The rawness of his words struck Richard like a knife. He looked at Daniel again, really looked. The boy's face carried something hauntingly familiar. The curve of his jaw, the way his eyebrows furrowed when he was sad. It was subtle, but Richard recognized it. It was the same expression Emily wore when she broke down the first time he had ever seen her cry years ago. Richard's chest tightened. He wanted to be angry, to push them both away, but the boy's vulnerability stopped him. He couldn't bring himself to direct his anger at Daniel, even if the boy was the reason this secret now lived in the open. He turned toward the window, staring into the night. His reflection stared back, hollow and uncertain. For the first time in years, Richard didn't feel like the man in control of his life. His voice came out low, almost a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this." Emily stepped closer. Desperation in her tone. "Richard, please, don't walk away from me. Don't walk away from us. We can find a way. You and I, we can still fix this." Richard didn't turn. "Fix? Emily, some things don't get fixed. Some things change us forever." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words pressing on all three of them. Daniel shifted nervously, his voice barely audible. "Mr. Richard, I don't want to take her away from you. I just wanted to know what it feels like to sit in a home like this, to hear her voice, to feel like I belong somewhere." Richard closed his eyes. The boy's honesty pierced through the storm raging inside him, and for the first time that night, he wondered not about Emily, not about betrayal, but about Daniel, about what kind of life this boy had lived before he knocked on their door. And as that thought settled in, Richard realized that the truth he had just uncovered might only be the beginning, because behind Daniel's presence, there might be an even bigger story waiting to surface. Richard's hand pressed against the cool glass of the window, his reflection staring back at him, fractured by the faint light coming from the living room lamp. His chest rose and fell unevenly, as though he were carrying the weight of two lives, his own and the life he had just discovered standing across from him. Behind him, the silence between Emily and Daniel stretched, heavy and unrelenting. Finally, Richard turned around, his voice low, controlled, yet trembling underneath. "Daniel, where were you before you came here?" Daniel hesitated. His fingers twisted the hem of his sleeve again, his gaze locked on the floor as though afraid to meet Richard's eyes. Emily's voice cut in, shaky. "Richard, maybe it's too much for tonight. He doesn't have to..." But Richard raised a hand, stopping her. "No, I want to hear it. I deserve to hear it. The truth didn't belong to just you, Emily. It belongs to him too. Let him speak." Daniel's lips parted, his breath unsteady. I lived in foster homes, a lot of them." His voice cracked, carrying years of exhaustion and pain. "Every time I thought I could stay, they sent me somewhere else. Sometimes the families were kind, sometimes they weren't, but none of them ever felt like mine." Emily's face contorted with grief, her hand reaching for him. "Daniel..." He shook his head, pulling slightly away from her touch. "I'm not blaming you, Mom. I just wanted to understand why I was never enough to keep." The words sliced through the room like a knife. Emily's sobs grew harsher, and Richard felt his throat tighten. He had seen numbers on a balance sheet collapse, fortunes rise and fall overnight, but nothing had ever unsettled him the way those words from a 12-year-old boy did. Richard sank slowly into the armchair, his elbows resting on his knees. His voice came out hoarse. How did you find her?" Daniel blinked back tears. "I wasn't supposed to, but one of the older boys in the home told me I could request some records when I turned 12. They had a file, a name, Emily Harper. I searched for her online. It wasn't hard. She was in articles, photos from charity events. She looked happy. She looked safe. I just wanted to see if she'd even recognize me. And when I showed..." Up that first night she did. Richard turned to Emily, his jaw tightening again. So this wasn't the first time. Emily lowered her gaze, guilt consuming her. No, the first night he came, I couldn't turn him away. He was standing in the rain, Richard, alone, shivering. How could I? Richard's head dropped into his hands. He wanted to be furious, to let anger consume every word, but beneath the fury was something else. Pity, not just for Emily, not just for himself, but for this boy who had never truly belonged anywhere. Then, almost suddenly, Daniel's voice hardened. There's something else. Both Richard and Emily looked up at him. Daniel's eyes, though brimming with tears, held a seriousness far beyond his years. The last home I lived in, the man there, he used to tell me things about my mom, about how she had left me because she didn't care. He said she was too busy living a rich life while I had nothing. His small fists clenched. I didn't want to believe him, but when I saw the mansion, the cars, the life she has now, I didn't know what to think, Emily gasped. Daniel, no, that's not true. I never stopped caring. I thought you were being taken care of. I thought you had a chance at a life I couldn't give you back then. Richard's eyes narrowed. Wait, who was this man? Daniel hesitated. Mr. Carter. He was my foster guardian for almost 2 years. He always said strange things about my mom. He said he knew her. Sometimes he even called her by name when he thought I wasn't listening. Emily's face went pale. Carter? Her voice broke. She sank into the couch, whispering to herself, No, it can't be. Richard frowned. You know him? Emily nodded slowly, her breath unsteady. Yes, years ago, before you and I met, Richard. He was someone I trusted. Someone who promised he'd help me when I had no one else. But he lied. He betrayed me. And I left Daniel in his care for what was supposed to be temporary. Her hands covered her face. I never knew he stayed that long with him. Richard's blood ran cold. So you're saying this man, this Carter, he knew everything about your past, about Daniel, about you? Emily nodded miserably. Daniel's voice cracked again. He said I was unwanted, that no one would ever come back for me. That's why I came here. I had to see for myself. The room spun with tension, secrets unfolding like pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to solve. Richard stood again, pacing, his mind racing. If this Carter knew about Emily and Daniel, what else did he know? What else had been hidden all these years? Richard's frustration boiled over. Emily, this is more than just a hidden child. This is a mess of lies that someone else has been pulling apart behind the scenes. Carter, whoever he is, still has a hold on this story, and we don't even know what he's done with it. Emily's tears streamed down her face. Richard, I was young, naive. I thought I was protecting Daniel, giving him safety, but see, now I was wrong. I should never have trusted Carter, Daniel whispered. He said he'd come for me again, that even if I left, he'd find me. Richard stopped cold. His heart thudded in his chest. He said that? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. The night I ran away, he told me I belonged to him, that my mom had given me up once and I'd never escape that truth. Emily clutched Daniel's shoulders, her voice frantic. No, Daniel, that's not true. You belong here. You belong with me. Richard's mind raced. The image of Carter, a man he had never met, loomed over him like a shadow creeping into his home. Suddenly, Richard realized this wasn't just about betrayal or hidden secrets anymore. It was about the fragility of their family, the vulnerability of a boy who had already suffered too much, and the presence of someone who might still try to tear everything apart. Richard took a deep breath, his tone firm, though cracks of emotion bled through. Daniel, listen to me. Whatever Carter said, whatever lies he filled your head with, it ends here. You're not alone anymore. Not if I have anything to say about it. Daniel's eyes widened, uncertain but searching. You don't even want me here. I heard the way you looked at me when you found out. You don't want me ruining your life." Richard swallowed hard, his chest tight. He knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. His voice broke as he spoke. "Daniel, I don't know what to do with all of this. I don't know how to feel yet. But I do know this. You didn't ask for any of it, and it's not your fault. If anyone ruined anything, it wasn't you." Emily covered her mouth with her hand, her tears spilling silently as she watched Richard kneel before the child she had once abandoned. For the first time that night, Daniel's expression softened. A glimmer of hope flickered behind his tired eyes. But before that moment could settle, Richard's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, frowning. The screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in years: Carter. The room froze. Emily's face drained of color, and Daniel's lips parted in fear. Richard slowly picked up the phone, his hand trembling as the ringing continued. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the name, his voice barely a whisper. "How does he have my number?" Emily shook her head in disbelief. "Richard, I never told him anything about you." The phone stopped ringing. The silence that followed was louder than any sound could have been. Richard placed it back on the table, his mind unraveling faster than his heart could catch up. Somehow, Carter knew, and Richard realized with a sickening certainty that their story was no longer just about secrets of the past. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And the truth that had just cracked open their home was only the beginning of something far darker. The name still glowed faintly on Richard's phone screen, even though the call had already ended. Carter. The single word seemed to echo in the silence, louder than the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Richard's hand hovered over the phone for a moment longer, his thumb brushing across the glass. But he didn't call back. Instead, he slid the device onto the table as if it were poisonous, as if even touching it too long might spread something dangerous into the room. Emily's breathing was shallow, her face pale, her hands trembling against her lap. "Richard," she whispered, her voice breaking, "he's not supposed to know anything about us. Not you, not this house. I don't understand how he—" Richard cut her off, his voice sharper than he intended. "You don't understand. Emily, this man has my number. He called me. That means he's not only watching Daniel, he's watching us." Daniel's small voice cracked through the heavy air. "He always said he had eyes everywhere, that he knew where I went. Maybe he wasn't lying." Richard turned toward the boy, his expression softening but still edged with fear. "Daniel, I need you to tell me everything. Everything he ever said to you, every threat, every word. Nothing is too small." Daniel looked unsure, his hands gripping the fabric of his hoodie as though he were holding onto the only thing protecting him. "Sometimes at night," he whispered, "I'd hear him talking on the phone. He'd say my name, he'd say things about my mom, and once he said something about waiting for the right time." "The right time?" Richard's voice was barely audible, but the weight of his words pressed down on everyone in the room. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, I didn't know what he meant, but he always said I was proof of something, proof he could use one day." Emily's hand shot to her mouth. "Oh, God!" Her tears came harder, faster. "Richard, don't you see? He never let go of me. After all these years, he's been waiting. He's been holding Daniel like a weapon, waiting for the moment to use him against me." Richard paced the floor, his mind racing. He had dealt with hostile board members, competitors trying to claw at his business empire. But this was personal in a way he couldn't calculate or control. And for the first time, the mansion, his fortress of wealth and power, felt fragile, as if its walls couldn't protect them from the shadows pressing in. Emily reached out toward him, desperation in her eyes. "Richard, we have to protect Daniel. No matter what happens between you and me, we can't let Carter get near him again." Richard stopped pacing and turned toward her, his voice heavy. "Do you even realize what you've done, Emily? By keeping this secret all these years, you didn't just hurt me, you gave Carter power. You let him hold on to something that should have never been his, and now he's at our doorstep." Emily sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. I know I was wrong, but please, Richard, please don't punish Daniel for my mistakes. He doesn't deserve that." Daniel looked between them, his wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. "I don't want to cause trouble," he whispered. "If me being here makes everything worse, I can leave. I don't want to be the reason you fight." Richard's chest tightened. He stepped closer to Daniel and knelt down again, his voice firm but trembling with emotion. "Listen to me, Daniel. You're not the problem. You've never been your problem. The problem is the lies, the silence, and the man who kept you in his grasp when you deserved better. Do you understand me?" Daniel's lips quivered as he nodded. For the first time, a small flicker of relief crossed his face, though it was faint and fragile. But the fragile moment shattered when Richard's phone buzzed again. All three of them froze. Richard glanced at the screen. Carter again. His thumb hovered, but instead of answering, he hit decline. A second later, a message appeared. "You can't hide him from me." Not forever. Richard's blood ran cold. He handed the phone to Emily, his jaw set. "Read it." Her hands shook as she held the phone, her eyes scanning the words. She pressed her lips together, her face crumpling. He knows Daniel is here." Daniel's voice trembled. "What does he want with me?" Richard took the phone back, staring at the message, his thoughts racing. Control. That's what he wants. Power over Emily, power over this family, and he thinks using you is the way to get it. Emily broke down, burying her face in her hands. "Richard, what do we do?" Richard stood tall, his figure casting a shadow across the room, his voice steady even though his insides churned with fear. "We don't let him win, not this time." Daniel looked up, hope flickering in his eyes again. "But how? He always finds me." Richard knelt in front of him, his eyes locked on the boys. "Because he's never had to go through me before." Emily's breath caught. She had never seen Richard like this. Not in the boardroom, not in any argument they'd ever had. There was something raw, almost desperate in his tone, but it carried a promise she wanted to believe. But even as Richard spoke with conviction, a new thought gnawed at the back of his mind. Carter hadn't just stumbled into this moment. He had waited. He had chosen his timing carefully, and if he was reaching out now, it meant he had already set something in motion. As Richard returned to the couch, his phone buzzed again. This time, another message. He unlocked it slowly. The message was short, chilling. "Check your door." Richard's heart stopped. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Emily's eyes widened. "Richard, what is it?" He didn't answer. He walked quickly to the front door, his pulse hammering in his ears. The heavy wooden door loomed before him, the silence pressing in harder with each step. Slowly, cautiously, he turned the handle and pulled it open. There was no one outside. The night was quiet, the trees swaying gently under the faint glow of the streetlight. But when Richard looked down, his blood ran cold. On the doorstep lay an old, worn-out photograph. He picked it up with trembling hands. It was a picture of Emily, much younger, holding a baby in her arms. Her hair was messy, her eyes red from crying, but the love in her gaze was unmistakable. Richard's stomach twisted as he realized the baby in the photo was Daniel, and scrawled across the bottom in messy ink were 4 chilling words. "He was always mine." Richard's knees nearly buckled. He turned back toward the living room, his face pale, the photo shaking in his hands. Emily's eyes locked on it instantly, and her scream tore through the house. Daniel's face drained of color, his small body trembling. Richard held the photo tighter, his mind spinning, his heart breaking under the weight of what it meant. Carter hadn't just been watching, he had proof, he had history. He had been there from the beginning, and now Richard knew Carter wasn't just a shadow from Emily's past. He was a threat in their present and a danger to their future. Richard's hand trembled as he held the faded photograph, his pulse pounding so loud he could barely hear Emily's cries behind him. The weight of the picture felt heavier than stone, as though it carried not just memories but accusations, promises, and a past he had never been allowed to touch. Emily rushed forward, her fingers clawing for the photo, but Richard pulled it back instinctively. "Don't," his voice cracked, raw. "Don't even try to hide this. You told me you carried this alone, that you left it in the past, but he had this picture all along." Emily's face crumpled as she shook her head frantically. "Richard, I swear, I don't know how he got that photo." That day, her voice faltered, trembling as though dredging up memories she had buried deep. "That day was the hardest of my life. I never let anyone take pictures. I didn't want proof of my shame. But Carter was there. He must have taken it without me knowing. He's been holding on to it all these years." Richard's jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the edges of the photo. "So this man, this Carter, he didn't just foster Daniel. He stole your pain, Emily. He collected it. He waited for the perfect moment to throw it in our faces." Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the room, his small chest rising and falling quickly, his eyes darting between his mother and Richard. "Why would he do that? Why would he keep something like this? I thought he hated me. He never acted like he cared." Richard turned toward him, his voice softer but edged with determination. "Because, Daniel, men like him don't need to love. They don't need to care. All they need is control. And if they can't have it by kindness, they'll take it by fear." Emily collapsed into the couch, her sobs muffled by her hands. "All these years, I thought I was free from him. I thought leaving Daniel behind meant Carter couldn't hurt me anymore. But he's been in the shadows the whole time, watching, waiting." Richard walked across the room and crouched in front of Daniel, holding the photo low so the boy could see it. "Do you remember this picture, Daniel? Did he ever show it to you?" Daniel shook his head quickly, his eyes wide. "No, never. If he had, I would have known right away who my mom was. He kept it from me." His voice cracked with sudden realization. "He didn't want me to find her. He wanted me to believe his lies, that I was unwanted, that she'd never look for me." Richard's throat tightened as he placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "And that's why you're here now, because you didn't believe him forever." Daniel's lower lip quivered, but he held Richard's gaze. "I didn't believe him, but sometimes I was scared he was right." Emily finally lifted her face, her eyes swollen from crying. She whispered, "You were never unwanted, Daniel. Not for 1 second. I was weak, I was scared, but I never stopped loving you." The boy looked at her silent, his young face caught between wanting to trust and being too hurt to let go. Richard stood, the photo still in his hand. He walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames that were now little more than embers. His voice came out low, almost to himself. "He knows where we live. He knows how to get to us. And he wants us to know he's watching. But why now? Why wait all these years? Why reach out to me?" Emily hugged her arms around herself. "Because he knows you're the one thing I can't lose. He knows that if he can break you, he breaks." "Me too." The phone buzzed again. Another message from Carter. Richard's hands shook as he unlocked it. "Tell Emily she owes me a debt, and I always collect." Richard read it aloud, his voice echoing with disgust. He turned the phone around and showed Emily. "What debt?" Emily's face drained of color. She looked away, shaking her head. I can't talk about that now." Richard's voice thundered with frustration. "You have to talk about it now. Secrets got us into this mess, Emily. If you keep burying the truth, he'll use it against us again and again." "What debt?" Emily's lips trembled, her body trembling with them. "When I was alone, when I had nothing, Carter was the one who helped me survive. He gave me money for rent, food. He told me he'd protect Daniel when I couldn't, and I believed him. I thought I owed him everything. But later, I realized it wasn't kindness, it was a chain, and he's never let go of it." Richard stared at her, fury and heartbreak colliding inside him. "So he thinks he owns you and Daniel, and now he's come to collect." Emily nodded, her sobs returning. "Yes." Daniel's voice shook as he whispered, "What if he takes me back? What if he makes me go with him?" Richard knelt again, gripping Daniel's arms firmly but gently. "Listen to me. No one is taking you anywhere, not while I'm here. Do you understand? Whatever Carter thinks he owns, he's wrong. You don't belong to him. You belong to yourself." For the first time that night, Daniel's tears spilled over. He threw his arms around Richard's neck, clinging tightly. The boy's fragile trust, forming slowly in the cracks of fear, caught Richard off guard. He hesitated, then wrapped his arms around him, holding him as if promising to carry what Emily had dropped years ago. Emily watched them through tear-filled eyes, guilt stabbing her like a knife. She whispered, "I should have told you sooner. I should have told you everything." Richard looked up at her, his voice steady but cold. "You're right. You should have. But it's too late for what-ifs now. We deal with what's in front of us. And what's in front of us is a man who thinks he still has a claim on your life, and Daniel's." Suddenly, the mansion's doorbell rang. The sharp chimes sliced through the silence, making all three of them jump. Richard stood immediately, his heart hammering in his chest. Emily grabbed Daniel's hand protectively, pulling him close. Richard walked to the door slowly, his eyes narrowing. He pressed his ear against it, straining to listen. Nothing. Just silence. He hesitated, then slowly turned the handle. On the doorstep sat a plain brown envelope. No return address, no markings, just their address written in large, messy black letters. Richard picked it up cautiously, his fingers stiff, and brought it inside. Emily shook her head violently. "Don't open it, Richard, don't!" But Richard tore it open, his gut twisting as he pulled out the contents. Inside were several photographs. Daniel at the foster home, sitting alone on the steps. Daniel walking down a street at night. Daniel standing outside the mansion gate, the first evening he showed up. And one final photo that made Richard's stomach drop. Daniel asleep on their living room couch, taken only days ago. Richard's hands shook as he spread the photos across the table. His voice was low, dark. "He's been here. He's been inside this house," Emily gasped, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the couch. Daniel pressed against her side, terrified. Richard clenched his fists, his fury finally boiling over. "This isn't just a man from your past anymore. He's here, he's watching us, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants." Emily whispered through her tears. "But what does he want, Richard? What does he really want?" Richard stared down at the photo of Daniel sleeping, his jaw set, his heart heavy. He didn't have the answer yet. But one thing was clear. Whatever Carter's plan was, it had only just begun, and the family, broken and fragile as it already was, would be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The photographs lay scattered on the dining table, their edges curling slightly, but their weight pressing down on all three of them like invisible chains. Each image felt like a violation, proof that their home was no longer a safe place, but a stage being watched by unseen eyes. Richard stood with his hands on the table, his chest rising and falling, like he was forcing himself not to explode. Emily sat motionless on the couch, her arm tightly wrapped around Daniel, who buried his face against her side, trembling with every passing second. Richard finally spoke, his voice low but thunderous in its control. "He's been here. He's been in this house, Emily. Do you understand what that means? He's not just sending threats, he's already inside our lives." Emily shook her head, her tears still flowing. "Richard, please. Maybe it's just to scare us. Maybe he didn't actually—" Richard cut her off sharply, slamming his fist down on the table so hard the photographs jumped. "Don't lie to yourself. Don't dare soften this. Look at them. That last photo, Daniel asleep on our couch. That's not from years ago, that's from days ago. He walked through our doors, past everything, and we didn't even know." Emily's sobs broke again, muffled into her hands. Daniel peeked up at Richard with wide, frightened eyes. "Why is he doing this? Why won't he just go away?" Richard turned to the boy, his anger softening instantly at the sight of his fear. He crouched down in front of him, placing both hands firmly on his small shoulders. "Listen to me, Daniel. This isn't your fault. Nothing about this is your fault. That man, he's broken inside, and broken people. They tried to break others to feel powerful, but I swear, he will not break you. Do you understand me?" Daniel blinked hard, trying to fight the tears welling in his eyes. He nodded quickly. Though his trembling betrayed him, he whispered, "I believe you, but I'm scared." Richard pulled him into his chest, wrapping his arms around him in a protective embrace. "Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, but you're not alone anymore." Emily watched the scene, her guilt growing heavier. She whispered under her breath, so low it was almost inaudible, "I made him alone once. I can't let it happen again." Just then, Richard's phone buzzed again. The sound ripped through the room like a knife. He stood, pulling it from his pocket, his thumb hesitating before unlocking it. Emily's eyes locked on the device, her body tense, Daniel clinging to her side again. A new message appeared. "Check the drawer under your bed. Some secrets never stay buried." Richard froze, his skin prickling with cold sweat. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to Emily, whose face went pale as chalk. He whispered hoarsely, "What drawer?" Emily's lips parted, her voice faint. "Richard, please don't." But Richard didn't wait. He stormed toward the stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing through the silent house. Emily stumbled after him, clutching Daniel's hand, begging, "Richard, stop. Please don't open it." When they reached the bedroom, Richard yanked open the drawer beneath their bed. At first, it looked empty. Then he reached further inside and felt something taped to the underside. His hands trembled as he tore it free. A small, worn envelope sealed shut. Richard ripped it open. Inside were several letters, folded neatly. He unfolded the first one, his eyes scanning the words, his breath catching in his throat. The handwriting wasn't Emily's, it was Carter's. The letter read, "Emily, one day you'll realize you can't erase me. You can't erase what we shared, what I gave you, or what you owe. Daniel will always be the bond between us. Whether you hide him, whether you abandon him, or whether you take him back, he will always carry my shadow, and so will you." Richard's hands shook violently as he dropped the letter to the floor. Emily collapsed onto the bed, her sobs uncontrollable. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, his voice barely a whisper. "What does it mean? Why does he talk like Daniel belongs to him?" Richard turned, his eyes blazing with a question that burned his insides. "Emily, what does this mean? What is he talking about? What bond?" Emily covered her face with her hands, rocking back and forth. "I didn't want you to know. I prayed you'd never find out. I thought it was behind me." Richard's voice cracked, desperate and furious. "Tell me the truth, Emily. Did Carter—" He stopped, the words too painful to finish. His chest heaved as he forced them out. "Did Carter hurt you? Was he part of Daniel's past in a way you never told me?" Emily dropped her hands, her face streaked with tears. She shook her head violently. No, Richard, he's not Daniel's father, if that's what you're thinking. Daniel is mine alone. But Carter, He wanted me. He wanted control over me. And when I wouldn't give it, he used Daniel as his weapon. He raised him to believe. Lies about me. That's the bond he's talking about. That's the shadow. Richard's eyes narrowed, though his heart still hammered with doubt and rage. He wanted to believe her, but the words in Carter's letter clung to him like poison. And you let this man stay close enough all these years to write letters and slip them into our home? Emily's voice cracked. I didn't let him. Richard, he always finds a way. I tried to run, I tried to hide, but he always knew. Daniel suddenly spoke up, his voice shaking but louder than before. He always said Mom belonged to him. He told me once that no matter where I went, she'd come back to him. I never believed him, but I didn't know what to believe anymore. Richard stared at the boy, his heart breaking again. Daniel, you should have never carried those words. That's not love. That's chains. And I will break every one of them. The room went silent, heavy with revelations and dread. And then another sound broke through, the faint creak of footsteps downstairs. All three froze. Richard straightened, his body tense, his eyes darting toward the bedroom door. Emily's hand clamped tightly on Daniel's arm. Richard, she whispered, her voice trembling, tell me you locked the front door. Richard's mind raced back. The photographs, the envelope on the porch, the letters hidden under his bed. He realized he hadn't checked the door after bringing in the last envelope. The footsteps grew louder, slow, deliberate. Richard moved toward the hallway, every muscle in his body coiled with rage and fear. He turned back, meeting Emily's terrified eyes. Stay here, keep him close. Emily pulled Daniel into her arms, whispering prayers against his hair. Richard stepped into the hallway, his fists clenched. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The sound of the footsteps stopped suddenly, as though whoever it was had been waiting for Richard to come closer. A voice, calm and steady, echoed up from the darkness below. Still protecting what's mine, Richard. Richard's chest froze at the sound, deep, familiar, chilling. Carter was inside the house. The silence after Carter's voice was suffocating. It seemed to wrap around the walls of the mansion like thick smoke, choking the air from the room. Richard froze halfway down the staircase, his eyes locked on the dark outline standing at the bottom. The faint glow of the porch light spilled just enough through the glass panes of the front door to reveal him. Carter wasn't rushing, wasn't hiding. He stood tall, composed, with the kind of stillness that unnerved Richard more than if he had stormed in with violence. His posture radiated arrogance, like a man who believed the house, the moment, and even the people inside belonged entirely to him. Richard's hand gripped the banister so tightly, his knuckles turned white. You don't belong here. His voice was steady, but every nerve inside him screamed. Carter chuckled softly, the sound echoing across the room. Funny. I could say the same about you. This house, this family, this boy, none of it truly belongs to you, Richard. You just filled the gap. Richard stepped down another stair, his chest tight. You talk about them like they're possessions. They're not. They're people. And you've had your claws in them long enough. From the hallway above, Emily's voice cracked, trembling with panic. Carter, please, leave us alone. Haven't you done enough damage? Carter tilted his head upward, his eyes finding her in the shadows at the top of the stairs. His lips curled into a faint smirk. Emily, you still cry the same way you used to. I can almost hear the same fear in your voice. After all these years, you still haven't learned. Fear only makes you weaker, and weakness makes you mine. Emily gasped, her hand tightening around Daniel's arm as he clung to her side, terrified. Richard's rage threatened to boil over. He took another step, his voice low and dangerous. You will not talk to her like that. Not in this house. Not ever again. Carter's smirk widened, as though Richard's anger was a performance he had paid to see. I wondered about you, Richard, the millionaire who swooped in and cleaned up Emily's little mess, the man who gave her a mansion to hide in. Did you really think you could erase me with money? That wealth could rewrite history? Richard's fists tightened. History is gone. What matters is now. And now, you're standing in my house, threatening my family. That ends tonight. For the first time, Carter's eyes flicked to Daniel, who peeked from behind Emily's trembling figure. His voice softened, disturbingly calm. You've grown, boy. Taller, stronger. You don't cry as easily as you used to. But those eyes... He leaned slightly, his gaze sharp. They're still hers. And that's why you'll never escape me, because you'll always remind me of her. Daniel whimpered, pressing closer to his mother. Emily burst into tears again, shouting through them, "Stop it! He's not yours! He never was. You can't keep him chained to your shadow." Carter's smirk faltered for just a second, a flicker of something darker flashing across his face. "Not mine? You can't say that, Emily. You can't stand there and erase what happened between us. You may have run, you may have left me in the dark, but the past doesn't vanish just because you want it to." And Daniel, he's living proof of that. Richard froze mid-step. His chest tightened, a storm of questions roaring in his mind. He glanced back at Emily, his voice breaking. "Emily, what is he talking about?" Emily's face crumbled, her tears flowing harder. "Richard, no, don't listen to him. He twists everything. He wants you to believe his lies." But Carter's voice cut through like a blade. "Lies? Or truth you're too cowardly to admit?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out another folded paper. Slowly, theatrically, he held it up. "You left this behind when you walked away from me. A paternity test you never let him see. You hid it, Emily. But I kept it." The room seemed to collapse in silence. Richard felt the ground slip beneath him, his throat dry. What did you just say?" Emily sobbed harder, covering her face. "Richard, please don't believe him. He's manipulating everything." Carter opened the paper with careful precision, then let his eyes scan it before reading aloud in a calm, deliberate tone. "Name, Daniel Carter. Mother, Emily Brooks. Father, unconfirmed. Possible paternal link, 97% probability to..." His eyes flicked up, locking onto Emily. "Carter Reynolds." Daniel's small body trembled violently. He turned to his mother, his voice breaking into pieces. "Mom, what does that mean? He's lying, right? He's lying." Emily reached for him desperately, shaking her head. "No, baby, no. You're not his. You were never his. He's doing this to hurt us. He forged that test, Daniel. You have to believe me." But Richard's world spun out of control, his vision blurred as he staggered down the last few steps. "Emily," his voice cracked with betrayal, "did you ever even doubt? Did you ever think he might..." His words collapsed under the weight of his agony. Emily sobbed harder, crawling toward him across the floor. "I doubted everything back then. I was broken, alone. But the moment I saw Daniel's face, I knew he wasn't Carter's. Richard, I swear to you, I would never hide something like that from you if it were true." Carter's voice sliced through the moment. "She knew, Richard, and she chose you anyway, because you were the safe bet, the money, the stability. But me, I was the fire she couldn't control, and that fire made Daniel." Daniel screamed suddenly, the sound raw and heart-shattering. "Stop! Stop lying! I don't want you. I don't want any of this. I just wanted a family who wanted me." His small fists pounded against his chest as he collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Emily dropped beside him, wrapping him in her arms, her own cries mixing with his. Richard stood frozen, his hands shaking, his world caving in. For the first time, Carter's smirk softened, not into kindness, but into something far more sinister. Satisfaction. "See, That's all I ever wanted, Richard. Not to kill, not to destroy, just to remind you both. You'll never erase me. Not from Emily's past, not from Daniel's blood, not from your marriage. Richard finally snapped. His voice thundered across the room, filled with a fury that shook the walls. Get out! Get out of my house before I drag you out myself. Carter didn't flinch. He slid the paper back into his coat pocket, his smirk returning. I'll leave tonight, but I'll be back. Because whether you admit it or not, I live. Here now, I live in every doubt Richard has when he looks at Daniel. I live in every tear Emily cries when she wonders if he's mine. I don't need to stay in this house, Richard. I already own it, from the inside out. With that, Carter turned, opened the door, and stepped out into the night, leaving silence heavier than thunder in his wake. Emily clutched Daniel tightly, whispering over and over, "He's lying, baby. He's lying." But her own sobs betrayed the cracks in her certainty. Richard stood motionless in the center of the room, his heart shattered, his mind drowning in questions he never wanted to ask. And for the first time since he had known Emily, he didn't know if he could trust the woman crying before him. The house, once so grand and safe, now felt like a prison filled with shadows. And the worst part was knowing Carter hadn't come. To end the nightmare, he had only just begun. The front door clicked shut behind Carter, but the echo of his words stayed behind like a ghost. Emily sobbed into Daniel's hair, whispering desperate reassurances. She barely believed herself. Richard stood in silence. The paper Carter had read still burned into his memory, a wound deeper than any physical scar could leave. The air in the mansion was heavy, suffocating, until Daniel suddenly pulled away from Emily's embrace. His tear-streaked face turned toward Richard, his voice trembling. "Do you believe him? Do you think I belong to him?" Richard's throat tightened. His first instinct was silence, because the truth was that his mind had been poisoned. Carter's voice kept replaying in his head, forcing doubt where certainty once lived. But then Richard looked into Daniel's eyes, innocent, broken, pleading, and he remembered what he had seen in them the very first night the boy had walked into their home, a reflection of his own pain, his own loneliness. "No," Richard whispered finally, his voice steadying. "I don't care what paper he waves. In front of me, you are not his. You are not his shadow. You're Daniel, and that's enough. That's everything." Daniel threw himself into Richard's arms again, crying harder, but this time it was relief. Emily reached for them, her trembling hands pressing against Richard's shoulder, her voice raw. Thank you for not letting him destroy us." But just then, a faint tapping sound echoed from the window. All three froze. Richard slowly lifted his head and turned toward the glass. Outside, half hidden in the shadows of the tall trees, a figure stood watching, Carter. Only this time, he wasn't smirking. He was holding something in his hand. Richard squinted, and then his heart lurched. It wasn't another photo. It was a small envelope pinned beneath a heavy stone, which Carter placed carefully on the windowsill before turning and disappearing into the night. Emily gasped. "No, not again." Richard walked to the window cautiously, lifted the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper with a few handwritten words. His eyes scanned them, his chest tightening. "You'll never know the truth, because the truth is a story I get to write." Richard's hands shook, fury boiling in his veins. He wanted to chase Carter, to end this torment once and for all. But then he felt Daniel's small hand slip into his, anchoring him. He looked back at Emily and Daniel, both broken, both terrified. He realized then that Carter's greatest weapon wasn't violence, it was doubt. And if Richard allowed that doubt to grow, Carter would win without ever stepping foot in the house again. He took a deep breath, crumpled the note in his fist, and tossed it into the fireplace. The flames devoured it, erasing Carter's words. "He doesn't get to write our story," Richard said firmly, his eyes locked on Emily and Daniel. "We do." Emily broke into fresh tears, collapsing into his chest while Daniel held on tightly. For the first time, the three of them stood together, not as strangers connected by secrets, but as a fragile family bound by choice. Carter might still be out there. He might still watch from the shadows, whisper lies and plant doubts. But Richard understood now. The only way to beat a man like him was not with money, not with anger, but with unshakable truth. And the truth was simple. Family is not defined by blood or by the scars of the past, but by the people who choose to stay, no matter how heavy the burden. Moral lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous battles are not with fists or weapons, but with doubts planted in our hearts. True family isn't measured by DNA or wealth, but by love, trust, and the courage to protect one another, even when the shadows of the past try to tear everything apart.